In the middle of a harsh snowstorm in the west, a nurse who had been turned away by the world stumbled upon a dying man under the white snow. She knew that if she just turned away, her life would be much less complicated. But one decision to bend down to save him opened a journey that even she did not expect. If it were you, on that night so cold it hurt to breathe, what would you choose? Keep yourself safe, or save a stranger, only to have your heart drawn into a tumultuous thread of fate? Have you ever had a choice in your life that left you tormented, and a moment when you wished you had the courage to do the right thing? Even if the cost was great, I invite you to immerse yourself in a story of choice, kindness, and a love that is quiet but stronger than a blizzard. If this hook resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel to join me on the emotional journey ahead. The wind whistled through the old pines like a long, wild lament. In the Bighorn Mountains, winter always came sooner than expected and stayed longer than men could bear. But this year the cold was more severe than any winter before, as if the very lungs of those left on the Wyoming frontier were being tested. The snow was nearly 2 feet deep, so white that even the moonlight could not distinguish between sky and earth. In the 20 degrees Fahrenheit wind, the small log cabin nestled at the foot of the hill was like a lonely bass note in the desolate music of the West. The old wooden walls, the gray tile roof, the windows taped with a few pieces of cloth. That was where Evelyn Moore had been staying for nearly 4 months. Evelyn, a 42-year-old woman with blue eyes, faded by years of solitude, sat by a flickering fire. She wrapped herself in an old wool blanket, every thread frayed by many winters. On the table was only a half-pound of cornmeal, and a pinch of salt, enough for a few meals of porridge, if the heavens were kind enough not to send her another snowstorm. Each breath released a thin wisp of smoke that dissipated into the darkness. The wind seeped into every crevice of the cabin, causing the kerosene lamp to flicker as if about to go out. Evelyn was used to the cold, but on nights like tonight it was hard to believe that one would wake up the next morning. She was a nurse. Not the kind of nurse who had studied in a safe school, but a nurse on the battlefield where the sound of bombs exploded and screams mixed together, where she saw many lives disappear in her arms but could not save them. The only thing she had retained over the years was her skills and her compassion, the two things that had pushed her into the deepest quagmire of her life. In Pittsburgh, she was the most trusted person in the hospital. Until the incident happened, a high-ranking officer died after an emergency surgery she was in charge of. The press blamed her, the powerful family pushed her into a dark corner. Evelyn could not bear the cruelty of the slander. She chose to remain silent, left the city carrying the pain like a scar that would never heal. That's why she was in this corner of the Wyoming woods, nameless, alone, poor but free in her own silence. Silence is also a form of strength, even though sometimes it is an escape from the noise of the world. In the cabin, Evelyn closed her eyes, her thin hands hugging the bowl of porridge. The wind howled outside, threatening to blow the roof off the cabin at any moment. She had thought her life would be filled with days like this, cold wind, white snow, and an empty room. But then, in the middle of that seemingly uneventful night, she heard a strange sound. At first, it was so faint she thought she had misheard a muffled dragging sound like a wounded animal trying to find shelter. But after a few seconds, the sound became clearer. A heavy thud, then a gasp, then something crashing into the snow. Evelyn jumped up, went to the window, and pulled back the sheet. She strained her eyes through the thick snow. She saw nothing, only the swirling darkness of the storm. But that noise, she was sure it wasn't the wind. A strong premonition made her chest tighten. During her years as a war medic, she had learned to recognize the sound of pain, even when it was obscured by distance, darkness, or fear. And that sound, it was not the roar of a wild animal, but the sound of a man falling. She stood still for a few seconds, her hands gripping the edge of the door. Part of her wanted to ignore it. In this storm, leaving the cabin would be suicide. And she was exhausted, with only enough energy left to keep the fire going through the night. If she went outside, she could freeze to death in minutes. But in that moment, the images of her former patients, the pleading eyes on the battlefield, the times she held someone's hand in her final moments, all came rushing back like a rushing river. Evelyn wasn't the type to sit idly by while someone out there might be dying. No matter how cold the world was to her, she still couldn't be cold the way they wanted. She pulled on a thick coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and reached for the small oil lamp. The warm yellow flame reflected in her eyes, both determined and anxious. She opened the cabin door. The cold wind immediately hit her face, sharp as a knife. The snow stung her skin until it was numb, but Evelyn stepped out. Beneath her feet, the snow sank ankle-deep, then calf-deep, then knee-deep. Each step felt like it carried the life she had tried to bury. Then she saw it. Not the shadow of a wild animal, not a log, but a shape lying curled up on the white snow. A man. He lay on his side, one hand still clutching the reins of the horse that lay motionless beside him. His cowboy hat half covered his face, but the patches of snow that clung to his thick coat showed he had been there a while. His chest rose and fell weakly, occasionally drawing deep breaths that suggested life. Evelyn's heart clenched. She knelt immediately, her trembling hand touching his neck, feeling for a pulse. Pulse very weak, body cold, almost paralyzed. "I don't have much time left." A strong wind blew, causing her oil lamp to sway violently. Evelyn bit her lip, squinting at the stranger lying before her. If she left him alone, he would die in minutes. If she saved him, she might bring disaster upon herself. Like so many times before. Between those two choices, her heart was heavy as stone. But finally Evelyn bent down, slipped her arms under the man's shoulders, and said softly in a voice trembling but full of determination, "Don't die here. Not tonight. Not in front of me." With all her remaining strength, she pulled him through the thick snow toward the small cabin that was flickering in the night. That Wyoming winter began like that. The wind continued to whip at Evelyn's back as she struggled to drag the man's unconscious body through the deep snow. Each time she slipped, her knees hit the icy ground. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her only thought was to keep him alive. The man's horse, a dark brown stallion, large, beautiful, and powerful, was panting in the cold. Perhaps it had tried to lead its master closer to the light, closer to any remaining hope. Evelyn glanced at it, a silent admiration rising in her heart. But the animal was exhausted, unable to rise. She turned back to the man. His hands were numb with cold. His dark hair was caked with ice. His face, though pale and exhausted, had the firmness that is characteristic of Western men, men who have lived so long under the summer sun and winter ice that they have acquired a quiet strength that is hard to describe in words. To pull him back to the cabin, Evelyn tied one end of her shawl around her shoulders, trying to make a rudimentary rope out of it to lighten the load. Snow piled up her ankles, then her calves, but she refused to let herself think about giving up. Just get to the door, just a little longer, she told herself through ragged breaths. By the time she reached the cabin door, she was nearly knocked over. Her shoulders were burning, her muscles felt like they were about to burst. But she pushed herself up, opened the door, and quickly pulled him inside. The darkness and cold outside were instantly blocked out as the door slammed shut behind her. The fire in the wood stove flickered brighter as the wind blew in for a moment. The firelight reflected off the man's face, giving Evelyn a clear look for the first time. Broad shoulders, sharp cheekbones. A long gash across the right side of his coat, soaked with blood that had caked black patches in the firelight. Evelyn's heart sank. A wound. No, a gunshot wound. She bent down immediately, gently lifting his jacket. The bullet wound was near his ribs. The blood had congealed into cold, hard patches, but when Evelyn touched him, the faint warmth of him startled her. He was alive. But not for long if she didn't act soon. Even though she had been away from the medic's quarters for nearly a decade, Evelyn's hands still retained remarkable precision. She quickly removed his soaked coat, trying not to let the cold wind shock him further. Then she laid him down near the fire, adding blankets and towels to insulate him from the icy wooden floor. She pulled more wood and built the fire higher. The temperature in the cabin began to rise, but the man still shivered slightly. That was good. Shivering was a sign that the body was still able to fight the cold. She put her hand to his forehead. Hot. A low fever was brewing. Evelyn took a deep breath. This was dangerous. Taking a small knife from the kitchen, she put the blade in the fire to sterilize it. Then, using scissors, she cut open his shirt to see the wound. The bullet had penetrated the skin, but there was no exit hole, meaning it was still inside. The wind howled outside the window, but it was so quiet in the cabin that she could hear his rapid breathing, a thin line between life and death. In that moment, Evelyn felt something very strange. Since the day she left Pittsburgh, she had promised herself that she would never let anyone into her life again, not save anyone, not care for anyone, not let her heart hurt anymore. She chose to live in seclusion, chose silence to forget the screams of the patients, the blame of society, the doubts of those who once called her comrades. But now, in front of her was a stranger, a person who seemed to have stories that were not gentle, and she bent down to him again, as if her instinct had never left her. When she touched the wound, the man stirred slightly. His eyelids fluttered slightly, as if trying to open. Evelyn whispered, "Can you hear me? If you can, try to breathe evenly." He didn't answer, but his breathing eased slightly. Even if it was just a little, it gave her the courage to continue. Evelyn gathered needles, bandages, a small bottle of whiskey, all that was left in the cabin. She knew she didn't have enough anesthetic, not enough standard equipment. But years ago on the battlefield, she had used less and still saved lives. When she poured a few drops of whiskey on the wound to clean it, the man jerked, groaning softly, but in such pain that Evelyn's chest ached. She placed her hand on his shoulder softly. "Come on. I know it hurts, but you have to endure it. I will save you. I promise." For the first time in 4 months, this small cabin rang with the promise of life. Evelyn began to stitch. Her hands trembled at first from the cold and fear of hurting him, but gradually the familiar skill returned. Each needle, each loop of thread was placed precisely. The flickering fire reflected her face, a face both strong and soft, resolute, and filled with silent sadness. When she finished, she felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. But the job wasn't over yet. She had to wake him. If he slipped into a coma, she could lose him in a matter of hours. She mixed warm water, boiled snow, filtered through the cleanest cloth she had. Then she touched his cheek lightly. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you still here with me?" His eyes opened slightly, green, deep, and tired. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse and weak, so weak that you had to listen closely to notice it. Evelyn breathed a sigh of relief, so relieved that her eyes were moist. "I'm Evelyn Moore, and you're out there, injured and almost dead. I just did what had to be done." The man swallowed hard. "My name is Cole Hartley." Evelyn was startled. Hartley. The name was familiar. It was associated with the largest ranch in the area, Hartley Ranch, about 10 miles away. But she asked something else, simpler and more necessary. "Why were you shot?" He closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if to gather his scattered memories. "I don't know who to believe anymore. All I know is, someone wants me dead." Evelyn stood still. The answer opened a ray of light and a deep rift in her heart. A man who was hunted by society is saving another man who is also hunted. It's not a coincidence, it's destiny. She sat down beside him, her voice soft but firm. "Tonight, you're safe. I'll keep you alive. Whatever's out there, it'll come later." The flickering flames reflected Evelyn's eyes. Eyes that had been hurt before, but in this moment, they reflected something she hadn't felt in a long time. The meaning of existence. That night lasted forever. In a small cabin in the middle of a storm, a woman torn apart by the past and a man hunted by the present lay side by side, sharing the fragile warmth of life. And no one knew that. From the moment Evelyn pulled Cole into the cabin, their entire lives took a completely different turn. The first morning after the storm came with an eerie silence. The wind no longer whistled against the roof of the cabin. Instead, there was only the soft crackling of the ice on the porch, the rustling of dry pine branches, and the tired but steady breathing of the man lying on the pallet near the stove. Evelyn leaned against the small window and looked out. The forest was covered in more than 2 feet of new snow, the weak sunlight reflecting silver rays, making everything seem both real and dreamlike. She pulled her woolen scarf up around her neck and took a deep breath of the cold air. The weather was less fierce today, but the cold still penetrated to the bone. She turned and walked towards the man, Cole Hartley. He lay still, but his breathing was more even than last night. His chest rose and fell slightly, no longer twitching with pain. The wound was still red and swollen, but no longer bleeding. Evelyn had been awake most of the night, monitoring his condition, checking his temperature every hour, changing the warm cloths every hour. Her body was so tired that sitting down for too long made her eyelids droop. But she stood there looking at him in a moment of silence she rarely allowed herself. "Who are you, Cole Hartley?" Evelyn whispered. The man, even though unconscious, still had a very resilient appearance, like someone who had gone through too many trials to easily succumb to the cold or a bullet. There was something very familiar about him. Not familiar with his face, but familiar with the way the world treated him, cruel, unfair, unexpected, leaving people with no choice but to stand up or be stunned. Evelyn recognized that, because she had been there. She took a deep breath, sat down at his level and gently shook his shoulder. "Cole, can you get up? I need to check your wound." He didn't move. Evelyn put her hand to his forehead, still warm but not rising. She peeled back the old bandage and looked at her precise stitches. She knew she wasn't as young as she had been in the war, but she felt a little relieved to see her hand steady. As she brought more whiskey to his lips, just a few drops to fight the infection from within, his head moved. His eyelids fluttered. Evelyn paused. "Cole, can you hear me?" He frowned, breathing heavily. Then slowly those pale blue-gray eyes opened. A moment of confusion, a moment of bewilderment, a moment of pain. Like someone who has just returned from the border between life and death. "Where are you?" His voice was hoarse and choked. "In my cabin," Evelyn replied gently, holding his head so he wouldn't move too much. "You were shot. I dragged you in here. You should thank heaven I was awake last night." Cole looked around. Firelight, wood walls, a faint smell of tobacco and alcohol. The interior was simple, old but neat. A cabin where a man lived alone, weathering the winter with whatever he could. He swallowed hard. "I have troubled you." Evelyn frowned. She was not used to the politeness of wealthy Western men who tended to pretend they did not need anyone's help. "You're badly injured. Don't think about it now." Cole took a deep breath, trying to hold himself up a little. Evelyn immediately pushed his shoulder gently. "Don't. You'll tear the stitches." He looked at her. His eyes held a clear sense of pride mixed with an instinctive wariness, as if living too long in a world of conspiracy had made him afraid to trust anyone easily. "Who are you?" Cole asked again, the question he had only half mumbled last night. It was the question Evelyn dreaded most, but was also the most familiar with. She sat down, took the bowl of warm water and handed it to him to drink in small sips. His fingers brushed hers, cold, rough, calloused from working outdoors. "I'm Evelyn Moore," she said. "A recluse here." "Hidden," Cole repeated, his voice hoarse. Evelyn nodded. She didn't want to tell him any more. Not because she was hiding it from him, but because she had hidden it from the world and from herself for years. The sadness inside her was sometimes like a giant block of ice. It hurt to touch. But Cole's eyes were watchful, and he asked again, more gently this time, "Hide for what?" The question was like a needle hitting a wound in Evelyn's heart. She turned away, gasping for breath. "Because I lost everything," she replied. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that you live." Cole looked at her for a few more seconds. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was like they were both looking at each other's wounds without intending to hurt. Finally, he let out a long breath. "I owe you my life." "You owe nothing," Evelyn interrupted. "Anyone who came across a dying man on a snowy night would do the same." "No," Cole said slowly. "Not everyone would risk their lives to drag a stranger home in a storm." She didn't answer, because deep down she knew he was right. She didn't do it out of duty, but because she was someone who couldn't stand to see someone die in front of her. Evelyn stood up and got a small pot. "You need to eat. I only have some cornmeal. It won't taste very good, but it will keep you awake." Cole pursed his lips. "Cornmeal? In this cabin? Is that all?" She stopped. He noticed immediately. He looked around again. Small pieces of firewood split evenly, but with only a few pieces left. A few small bags hung high in the corner to keep out mice. A wooden table covered with a cloth. A small cupboard almost completely empty. Something in his eyes changed. as if he realized the truth. She didn't save him under good conditions. She saved him when she herself was on the brink of despair. "You live alone. In this condition," Cole whispered. "It's okay," Evelyn replied, her voice as calm as a worn knife. "The winter will pass." Cole looked at her longer. He wanted to say something, but instead he closed his eyes, not from pain but from fatigue. Evelyn moved to adjust the blanket over him. Each movement was as gentle as placing a hand on a wound in someone's soul. Half a minute later, Cole opened his eyes again. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "My full name is Colton Hartley." "I know," Evelyn replied. "Hartley Ranch. Is it 9 or 10 miles away?" His eyes flashed with alarm. "You know my ranch. I've heard of it," she said. "Everybody around here has." Cole turned away, breathing heavily. "So, you know, someone wants me dead." The words dropped into the cabin like a rock into a frozen lake. Evelyn stood still. The wind outside blew through the cabin, making a long, wild-like moan. She turned around and looked at him deeply. "Can you tell me what happened?" Cole was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, in a low, steady voice, "I was betrayed." Just one sentence, but enough to fill the air with a heaviness Evelyn had never felt before. She sat down next to him, her voice warm. "You rest. That, later. I'll keep the cabin safe. Whoever's hunting you, they won't find you here easily." Cole looked at her a long time. There was something in his eyes, a fragile trust, newly formed but very real. "Evelyn," he said softly, "what's up? If someone comes here, you have to leave first." She chuckled softly. Not mockingly but gently as the morning breeze. "I'm not running anymore, Cole. No more hiding." She placed her cold but firm hand on his wrist, where the pulse was weak but as persistent as its owner. "And you can't run. At least not yet." Cole closed his eyes, relaxing his body for the first time since waking up. He spoke barely a breath. "You are the first person to tell me that." Evelyn did not reply. She just pulled the blanket up a little more, then got up to cook porridge. Outside, the snow was still white. But inside the cabin, for the first time in months of darkness, Evelyn felt someone besides herself breathing, a very strange feeling, very fragile, very alive. That morning in Wyoming came in a silence thicker than the snow. The air in the cabin still held the warmth of the fire, but outside the sky was as white as a giant sheet spread over the land. The sun had just peeked out from behind the tall pines, its thin light slanting through the cabin window, making the red glow in the hearth seem a little brighter. Evelyn did not sleep all night. She sat against the wooden wall, her arms around her knees, looking at the man lying beside the stove. She did not know how long she looked at him. Long enough to hear his heavy breathing, long enough to know that his fever had not returned, and long enough to realize, sometimes a breath from another person can make you feel like you are no longer alone. In recent years, she had never had that feeling. As the first light hit the floor, Evelyn stood up, treading lightly, so as not to wake Cole. She took the pot of snow water from the previous night, added the remaining cornmeal, and stirred. The faint aroma of hot porridge filled the cabin. Though simple, it was a rare meal that offered some real warmth. She was stirring the porridge when she heard a noise behind her. A faint groan, a slight movement. Then a sigh, not of someone dying but of someone waking from a weary sleep. Evelyn turned back. Cole was trying to open his eyes. The soft sunlight fell on his face, highlighting his experienced features, slightly wrinkled forehead, strong chin, sunburned cheekbones. A man who had passed the age of impulsiveness, and now only retained within him the strength of vast lands. His eyes blinked a few times as he came back to reality. Then he saw her. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice so hoarse it was just the sound of wind passing over his lips. She moved closer and put her hand on his shoulder. "You're awake. Just breathe slowly." Cole winced as he tried to lift himself. The pain made him hold his breath for a second. Evelyn immediately bent down, holding him back. "Don't try. The wound isn't stable yet. If you pull too hard again, I'll have to start over." Cole frowned, looking at her with eyes that were half pain, half confusion. "I live thanks to you." "You live on your own," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm. "I just help with the rest." He looked at her for a long time, His eyes slowly moved from her dark brown hair tied behind her neck down to her thin but determined hands. Then, as if realizing something, he said, "You didn't sleep all night. Not sleeping is normal for nurses." Evelyn smiled slightly. "I'm used to being on call for days at a time." Cole closed his eyes, as if trying to picture the woman before him. "Were you a nurse?" "Yes," she replied simply. "Not anymore." He was about to ask why, but seeing the silence in her eyes, he didn't press further. Sometimes one must respect the silence that others are trying to maintain. Evelyn set the bowl of porridge near the fireplace. "Would you like some? I'll help." Cole tried to move. As she set the bowl down, he touched her hand lightly. His fingers were rough and hard, the hardening that came from years of ranching. Evelyn's, by contrast, was thin and warm, as if she held some special force within her, both fragile and insistent. He ate spoonfuls, swallowing with difficulty, but she persevered. There were moments when she looked at him, as she would at a candle burning in the dark. Each little bit of light, a small victory. When he finished, Evelyn cleared the bowls. The smell of hot porridge mixed with the warm wood smoke made the cabin feel strangely familiar. No longer a hermit's shelter, but a home for a few brief minutes. Cole looked at her again, longer this time. "I need to know what happened last night. How did you find me?" Evelyn sat down beside him, her hands in her lap. "I heard something out in the woods. I thought it was a wild animal, but then I saw your horse, and you. It brought you closer to the cabin, I think." Cole looked up at the ceiling, thinking. "Buckshot. He's smarter than I thought." "Your horse?" Evelyn asked. "Yes. He's the horse I've had since he was a colt." Cole's voice dropped. "Is he alive?" Evelyn shook her head slightly. The answer made the air in the cabin sink. Cole looked away, took a deep breath. Losing a horse in the West, especially one you had for years, was like losing a member of the family. Evelyn understood. She put her hand on the blanket he clutched. She said nothing. In the West, loss is communicated not with words, but with a quiet presence. After a while, Cole asked softly, "How long have you lived here alone?" "Nearly 4 months." "Only 4 months, and the cabin looks like a place she has known for years." Evelyn looked down at her dry hands. When one wants to forget the world, any place can be home. The statement made Cole look up. It wasn't pathetic, just honest. So honest that he could feel the loneliness deep inside her. He looked around again. Poor, cold, old, little food, little firewood, no sign of wealth or comfort. He turned to look at her. "She lives very difficultly." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, a thin smile on her face. "I've had it harder than that. Wyoming wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me." Cole pursed his lips. "You are hurt inside," she chuckled. "Who doesn't?" Silence. A gentle silence, not awkward, not heavy, like two people gradually listening to each other's heartbeat, even though neither of them said it out loud. The moment lasted until Cole suddenly frowned. "I remember, I saw someone standing behind me before I was shot." Evelyn sat up straight. "Who do you recognize me?" Cole shook his head. "I only saw shadows, but I knew the sound of those boots." They weren't strangers. The words fell on the cabin, carrying with them a strange chill, not of winter, but of the emerging truth. Evelyn asked softly, "Who do you think wants to kill you?" Cole looked into her eyes. Deep, painful. "I don't know. But I know one thing." "What?" "I can't go back. Not now. Not until I know who betrayed me." Evelyn felt her heart beat a little faster, but her voice remained calm. "You stay here. I'll take care of the medical care. But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't do anything stupid." Cole laughed weakly, the first laugh he had heard since waking. "Western men can't help it." "Then you have to try this time." Evelyn crossed her arms, stern but not cold. Cole looked at her, long enough for her to look away. Then he said, his voice as low as the night, "I have never met anyone like you." Evelyn felt a warmth run through her chest. Dangerous. More dangerous than ice. But she did not reply, only stood up to add more wood to the fire to hide the wavering in her eyes. Outside, the snow was still white. But in the cabin between two people abandoned by life, something very small had begun to burn. Small as a spark, but if kept alive, it could become a flame that could light the whole winter. The second morning in the cabin began with the sound of wind coming through the cracks in the door. Not as fierce as the night before, but enough to remind us that this was still a cold frontier where people struggled to survive, let alone enjoy peace. The snow outside was still so deep that stepping on it would sink almost to the calves. The sky was brighter, but not warmer. Evelyn was used to the cold, but this morning it felt different. Not just cold on her skin, but cold inside, from worry about the man lying on the pallet near the stove. Cole was more alert than yesterday. He opened his eyes when Evelyn came to change the bandages. This time, though still tired, his gaze was not as wandering as before. It was clear, alert, and somehow wary. "Good morning," Evelyn said softly, her eyes softening as she saw the swelling had gone down. "You had a slight fever last night, but it's gone." Cole didn't answer right away. He watched her for a moment, as if trying to understand the woman who had saved him. "You stayed up all night?" he asked. Evelyn smiled faintly, her voice almost breathy. "I only slept a few minutes. You were breathing irregularly last night." Cole frowned. "You didn't have to do that." "I told you," Evelyn replied, placing her hand gently on his wound to check the heat. "When I take a patient in, I tend to him until he is able to stand up." She said it softly, but there was a quiet determination hidden within. The kind of determination of someone who had once failed to save someone, and vowed never to do it again. Cole was silent for a few seconds. He looked to the window where the silver sunlight barely shone on the wooden floor. Finally he whispered, "Thank." Evelyn just nodded. She wasn't used to receiving thanks, especially from someone like Cole, a Western cowboy with eyes clouded by the past. After changing the bandages, Evelyn helped him sit up slowly. Cole gritted his teeth in pain but did not cry out. He had the endurance of a man from the Wild West, a man who lived with horses, guns, and sudden snowstorms. "You're stubborn," Evelyn muttered as he struggled to keep his back straight. Cole breathed heavily. "I don't like being weak in front of others." "Don't be weak," Evelyn blurted, "but don't appear stronger than necessary." The words made Cole turn and look at her longer than usual. Something in his eyes, like fire hidden by cold ash, flickered. "Has anyone told you that you understand people more than they are comfortable with?" Evelyn paused. "I just say what I see." "And what do you see in me?" The question was like a knife cutting into the core of the truth. Evelyn paused for a few seconds before speaking. "I saw a man in pain, not just from the bullet." Cole didn't respond, but his breath missed a second. Evelyn didn't say more. There were things they weren't close enough to touch. By noon the snow had stopped. Evelyn opened the door briefly to air out the cabin. The cold air made Cole pull the covers closer. He looked out the world, swallowed by the white that stretched to the horizon. Evelyn brought a bowl of warm water to him. Cole drank it slowly, then asked, "Yesterday you said you hid from the world. Why?" Evelyn sat down beside him. For a moment she considered lying, but Cole's eyes, tired, weak, had an honesty that she couldn't avoid. "I was falsely accused," she breathed, her voice low, "and no one wanted to hear my explanation." The stillness in Cole's eyes told her he understood, in a way. "In the war," Evelyn continued, "I had to settle many disputes between soldiers, and I had seen how cruel people can be when they are afraid, and when I was falsely accused, people looked at me as if I were a bad omen." Cole pursed his lips. "You saved lives. Many. It doesn't matter when someone in power wants to make me the culprit." Evelyn's voice choked. "A man died in surgery, and I was on call. His son wanted a name to take his anger out on, and I became that name." "You leave," Cole said. "I didn't leave," Evelyn corrected gently. "I was pushed away. I chose not to fight, because I was too tired." Cole looked at her for a long moment. His eyes widened slowly as if a puzzle piece were falling into place. He said in a very small voice, "You don't deserve to live like this." Evelyn smiled sadly. "No one deserves to live like this. But sometimes you have to choose the path of least pain, even if it is lonely." The words seemed to blanket the cabin in silence. Cole set down his bowl and leaned back against the blanket. He felt a warmth in his chest, not pain, but sympathy, not pity. But realization the woman before him was stronger than anything the world had ever thrown at her. After a while, Cole continued, "Maybe I understand that feeling. Evelyn turned to look, waiting silently for him to speak. I was betrayed, he continued, his eyes darkening. Not by strangers, but by people I worked with, trusted. Do you know who it is? I think I saw his silhouette before he fell. Cole frowned. But I can't be sure. The fog, the snow, the gunshots, it all blended together. What else do you remember? Cole sighed, closing his eyes. I was on my way back to Hartley Ranch. I had something to tell my father, something he wouldn't like. But, before I got there was an ambush. Evelyn looked at him, her voice low. What would make someone want to kill you? Cole opened his eyes. For the first time since meeting her, he showed genuine hesitation. I found something I shouldn't have seen. Evelyn waited. No urging. It could be something to do with the ranch land, he said slowly. There are people who don't want me involved. Or, it could be something to do with my father's past. He was involved in some railroad protection organization. Old, secret, unclean, Red Creek Rangers, Evelyn Hoy. Cole started slightly. How did you know I saw their symbol on your shirt? Evelyn replied. I kept it. I didn't dare throw it away. Cole sighed. If it's them, then whoever's looking for me won't give up. Evelyn looked straight at him. Her voice was soft but hard as steel under the snow. Then you stay here until you get well. I won't let anyone take your life again. Cole looked up. Evelyn, don't say anything, she said softly. You need to rest. I will protect this place. The silence was no longer a void. It was a thread connecting two people with different wounds, but both suffering from the same pain, being pushed away from where they once belonged. Cole closed his eyes. You aren't scared, Evelyn put wood in the stove. The fire flickered. I faced death every day on the battlefield, she said, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her eyes. What I feared stayed in Pittsburgh. Cole did not reply, but his breathing came easier. Not because the pain had lessened, but because, for the first time, he felt like he wasn't completely alone in his escape from the darkness. And Evelyn, in the soft wind outside, understood that better than anyone. The afternoon passed quietly, as any winter afternoon in the Wyoming mountains usually does. The sun burned low for a moment, then faded, leaving a cold gray sky. Evelyn had just finished making a pot of warm water to change Cole's towel when she heard a faint crunch horse hooves on the compacted snow. She stood still, the towel in her hand frozen. It wasn't the sound of wild animals. It wasn't the snapping of branches. It was the sound of horse hooves, but restrained as if the rider were deliberately going very slowly, very softly. Evelyn put down the bowl of water and listened more closely. Her heart pounded heavily with each step as she approached the cabin. What's going on? Cole asked from the resting pallet, his voice still weak but enough to pick up on the change in the atmosphere. Evelyn put her finger to her lips, signaling silence. She walked to the window, gently lifted the shade to look out. Outside was a thick gray sky, the smoke from the stovepipe was tilting in the gentle wind, and in the midst of that scene was a lone knight. His horse was jet black. His long cloak covered almost to the saddle. A wide-brimmed hat hid most of his face. He stopped about 30 feet from the cabin, didn't say anything, didn't call anyone, just stood there watching. The silence sent a chill down Evelyn's spine, colder than the wind outside. Not a hunter, not a neighbor, not a visitor. A man riding a horse in the dead of winter to a remote cabin. Never a good sign. She turned back to Cole and saw that he was trying to push himself up with his hands, though his lips were pale with pain. Sit still. Evelyn rushed forward and held his shoulder. If you stand, you'll tear your stitches. No, Cole gasped. If he was looking for me, he wouldn't just knock. Then you must lie still, Evelyn said, her voice low but as hard as steel. I will speak to him. You cannot reveal that you are alive. Cole opened his eyes wide, looking straight at her. You won't open the door for him, will you? Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met she gave him a very small smile, but something in it made Cole freeze. Of course not. She wrapped an old woolen scarf around her shoulders and walked slowly to the door. She didn't open it. She just stood there, her voice calm as if she were talking to someone she knew. Who is out there? The sound of wind came through the crack in the door. Then a hoarse male voice replied, I'm looking for an injured man. He got lost somewhere last night." Evelyn looked at Cole. He shook his head immediately, wary, tense, almost panicked. She swallowed. "I live alone," she replied. "You must have come to the wrong place." "Really?" the other man's voice drawled doubtfully. "I saw drag marks in the snow, leading straight toward this cabin." Evelyn's hands clenched the edge of her shirt. He knew, or at least he suspected. She spoke slowly, word by word. "That mark could be from several days ago. I was hauling firewood back." He was silent for a few seconds again, the kind of silence that sent shivers down the spine of the person opposite. "You live alone in this harsh winter, that's right. Well, just evaded. Pace to the slave. Endless stayed. Aren't you scared?" Evelyn looked back at Cole, who was lying, half sitting, half lying, his knuckles white from clutching the edge of the blanket. She replied without a tremor, "I'm used to it." Outside, the man chuckled. A cold laugh. "Do you mind if I look around the cabin? That's not a question. It's a warning." Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart pounding under her sweater. "If you have good intentions, you won't search a woman's place." Outside, the horse's hooves moved. Cole looked at Evelyn, his eyes filled with worry. He wanted to scream, to stand up, to pull her behind him, the instinct of a Western man who always wanted to protect others. But he was completely helpless. Evelyn put her finger to her lips, signaling for continued silence. The sound of horse hooves advancing 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Evelyn gripped the doorknob tightly, preparing for the worst when, the sound of strong wind blowing through. The horse neighed softly. And then the strange man said a short sentence. "You should be careful. There are things walking around this area at night." With that he jerked the reins, turned the horse slowly and left. Not in a hurry. Not hurried. Not running. Just moving further and further away, as if he had planted a seed of doubt in this land and wanted it to sprout on its own. Evelyn did not move until the sound of hooves had completely disappeared into the distant pine forest. She let out a long sigh. "The door remains closed." Cole whispered, "Is he really gone?" "Yes." Evelyn turned but kept her eyes open for movement. "But he could be back at any moment." Cole pushed himself up with his hands, trying to sit up, but the pain was so bad he had to grit his teeth. "Gotta go," he hoarsely said. "Nowhere." Evelyn stepped forward and took hold of his shoulder. "If you go out now, you'll die before you get out of the woods. But I can't let you face danger alone." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes deeper and calmer than any reassurance. "I've lived alone for many years. I know how to deal with people like him." Cole looked at her for a long time. Guilt and helplessness mingled with another emotion he couldn't name in his gray eyes. Finally he said, his voice very low, "Evelyn, he knows I'm nearby. He'll be back. You're not safe alone." Evelyn sat down beside him, placing her hand on his chest right near the wound. Her hand, though thin, had a strange reassuring weight. "If he comes back," she said, enunciating each word slowly, "I will face him. And you must live." Cole narrowed his eyes, sighing as if he were releasing a pain longer than the snows of Wyoming. "I owe you. More than you think." Evelyn shook her head slightly. "You owe me just one thing." "What? Don't try to act strong when you're exhausted." Cole laughed, though it hurt. It was a tired laugh, but it carried a warmth the cabin had long lacked. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think I could get through everything alone." "I thought so too," Evelyn replied. The words hung in the cabin, causing the distance between them to shrink another notch. Outside, the sky was leaden. The snow had stopped, but the cold was deepening. In the cabin, only the firelight illuminated 2 faces, a wounded man fleeing from something unnamed, and a woman with a broken heart trying to heal herself by saving a stranger. And they both knew the appearance of the other night was not the end of the danger. It was only a warning. Tonight would be no peace, and from now on, their lives would no longer be separate. The morning was darker than usual. There was no snow, but the sky was a dark, silent warning. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the thick gray clouds drift slowly over the ice-covered pines. The light was so weak that she had to light the oil lamp even though it was only late morning. She took one last look around the cabin, the makeshift shelter she'd lived in for the past 4 months. The tarps covering the windows, the last logs in the corner. The rickety wooden bed, the old wool blanket, the empty copper pot, all spoke of a life of deprivation but familiarity. But today, the cabin is no longer a safe place. The strange rider had looked too closely last night. He had spotted someone in the cabin, and he was looking for Cole. If he came back, and he would, Evelyn knew the place would be torn apart like a rat's nest. She turned to Cole. He was sitting against the wall, his legs wrapped in a blanket, his breathing still labored. Though his fever had abated, he was too weak to stand. "We have to go," Evelyn said. Cole looked up, his eyes sharp. "I told you. You should leave me alone, and you don't say any more," Evelyn interrupted, her voice soft but hard as steel. "I won't have you murdered on my doorstep. You owe your life to me, and I won't let that go to waste." Cole looked at her for a long moment as if to protest, but his rapid breathing stopped him. Evelyn stepped closer, kneeling down to be eye level with him. "You can't stay here," she said. "Your wound is healing, but you couldn't survive an attack. This cabin can't either." Cole clenched his hands as if fighting the thought of being a burden. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I have drawn you into danger." She smiled slightly, but the smile tasted bitter in her throat. "Maybe I've been in danger for a long time. I'm just so used to it that I don't realize it anymore. And you need to be saved. You need to see your family again. No matter what happened between you and your father." Cole turned away, avoiding her piercing gaze. "It's not that easy." "I don't say it easily," Evelyn replied. "But I'm right." She stood up and walked to the corner where she had left her old backpack. Inside were a few survival items, a small dagger, a cloth bag of homemade disinfectant, some leftover bandages, and the last piece of clean cloth. Food was reduced to a few handfuls of cornmeal. She gathered the necessary things and returned to Cole. "Can you stand up?" she asked. Cole gripped the edge of the pallet. Every movement made his face turn white, but he made no sound. He shook with pain but maintained the pride of a Western man. He put one hand on Evelyn's shoulder, struggling to stand. His hand was heavy and hot, filled with both helplessness and wounded pride. Evelyn helped him up a little. Slowly. "Don't pull. I'm fine." Cole breathed through his teeth, but his voice betrayed the lie. When he stood up, cold sweat was beading on his forehead. Evelyn took a towel and wiped it away. "We'll take the forest path," she said. "It's harder to get to, but harder to spot." Cole nodded. She wrapped him in a sheepskin coat, dry and smelling of smoke, and handed him the wooden stick she used to collect firewood. "If it hurts too much, lean on me," Evelyn said. "No need to act strong with me." Cole looked at her, his eyes softening a little. "I don't pretend to be strong. I'm just used to doing things alone." Evelyn replied, her voice soft but penetrating. "Then, start learning to rely on others." They stepped outside. The cabin door closed behind her with a dry click. Evelyn stared at it for a second. The cabin had once sheltered her from the snow and the past, but it had also imprisoned her in a solitude she thought she had accepted. Now that she was gone, she was not surprised to feel lighter. The snow outside was thick and cold, but no longer falling. The forest was filled with an eerie silence, a peace that was more wary than relaxing. Cole took each step with difficulty, clutching his cane, his other shoulder resting on Evelyn. She supported him with all the strength of someone who had carried wounded men twice his weight in war, but her heart still clenched every time she saw him wince in pain. "Where are we going?" Cole asked, his breath coming in short gasps. "There's a trail leading south," Evelyn said. "No one knows it. We'll stop in an old rock hole and rest before dark." Cole tried to walk. Each step tore at his chest. "Are you okay?" Evelyn asked. "I'm fine," Cole replied. She tilted her head, looking at him with eyes that didn't believe a word. "You're terrible." Cole laughed softly despite the pain. "You're too straightforward. Better than let you fall and tear your stitches." "That sounds reasonable." Evelyn smiled. For the first time since meeting, the two had a gentle moment not covered by fear or pain. They crossed a section of the forest and followed a small trail, known only to those who had lived in it for a long time. Evelyn led the way, Cole following behind, holding onto a tree trunk whenever he needed to catch his breath. Cole's breathing was labored, but he held on. Men in the West were not accustomed to showing weakness, but Evelyn saw it better than anyone. "If you fall," Evelyn said without turning, "I'll carry you over my shoulders like a 120-pound deer." Cole snorted. "You're much smaller than a deer." "I'm stronger than he is," Evelyn replied, her expression unchanged. Cole laughed, then clutched his stomach in pain. But the laugh, despite the pain, steadied his steps. As they reached a clearing in the woods, the wind suddenly changed direction. It no longer filtered through the trees but blew straight down. Evelyn stopped holding up a hand for silence. Cole understood immediately. He held his breath. She strained her ears. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of hooves, distant but coming closer. Not one, two, maybe three. She turned to Cole. Their eyes met. No words were needed. They both knew the rider from last night had returned. And this time, he was not alone. "Go!" "Now," Evelyn said. Cole nodded, but his legs buckled. Evelyn caught him with her arms before he fell. His weight made her take a step back, but she held tight to his shoulders. "Hold on to me," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "We can make it to the rock. It's half a mile away." Cole struggled to stand, gritting his teeth. "If I don't keep up, I'll pull you," Evelyn said. "I leave no one behind." Cole looked at her. His eyes, strangely, were no longer filled with pain or wariness. There was respect in them, and something like a spark of trust, a faith he thought he had lost long ago. The sound of horse hooves grew louder. The pine forest began to echo with the sound. There was no time. Evelyn slung her backpack over her shoulder and wrapped her arm around Cole's waist. "Let's go," she said. They ran into the woods, not fast, not pretty, but an escape of two souls, wounded by the world, clinging to each other to survive. Behind them, the sound of horse hooves thundered like an approaching storm. In that moment, both Evelyn and Cole understood. The decision to leave the cabin today was not just about survival. It is the first step for them to change the direction of their lives. And the road back to Hartley Ranch won't be easy. The wind changed direction suddenly, carrying the chill from the mountaintop and the familiar smell of damp wood from the old forest. Evelyn guided Cole through the towering trees, the sun and snow slanting through the leaves. Under his rough sheepskin coat, Cole shivered slightly with each gasp, but kept pace with her as steadfast as a man accustomed to facing storms all his life. "How much further?" Cole asked, his voice low and hoarse, as if trying to keep the exhaustion from seeping into his body from showing. "Not far," Evelyn replied, though she wasn't sure. All she knew was that the trail led to a rocky hollow where she'd once taken shelter from the snow. Hopefully it was still safe. The hooves behind her seemed to have died away or were simply muffled by the thick forest. Still, Evelyn strained her ears to hear every little sound. Wind, pine branches rubbing against each other, snow sliding from top to bottom. Anything could be in there, even danger. "Did you hear anything?" Cole asked. "Not sure," Evelyn replied, "but I believe they're still around." Cole paused. "If they come near you, run first." You will sacrifice nothing," Evelyn said at once, her voice sharper than usual. "I told you, I will leave no one behind." Cole looked at her, his gray eyes blurred with fatigue, but still holding their inherent resolve. "You don't understand. I've lived my whole life alone." "I know how," No, Evelyn interrupted. "You're not alone anymore." The two of them stood in the middle of the forest, their breaths mingling with the thin mist. Something changed in Cole's eyes, a quiet, almost warm acceptance that made Evelyn feel her heart shift ever so slightly. She couldn't allow herself to think too much. "Not now. Let's go," she said. The trail led them into a thinner clearing where the light hung in long, silken slivers. But it wasn't the beauty that stopped Evelyn, it was the tracks beneath her feet. Horse hoof prints. Not hers. Not Cole's. A streak of churned snow. A streak of dark mud under the ice. And especially a shallow cowboy boot print showing that someone had passed by not long ago. Cole saw it too. It must be him. Evelyn nodded slightly. "But there is something not quite right." She knelt down and touched the shoe print lightly with her hand. It was no longer warm, but it wasn't completely frozen either. "Not just one," she said. "Two, maybe three." Cole tightened his grip on his stick. "They're circling." "Yes," Evelyn replied. "But they didn't know we were going south. Judging by their footprints, I guess they thought we were going east towards the valley." Cole frowned. "They think I'll find my way home the usual way." "And you don't," Evelyn said. Because you're following me. She looked up, meeting his eyes. In that moment they both realized something important. Evelyn's unfamiliarity with the land was an advantage. No one could predict her path. Cole chuckled, exhausted. I never thought I would one day live off of not knowing my way around. Evelyn replied calmly, but with a bit of warmth in her heart. Life is sometimes strange like that. They went deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thick and the light was thread-like. Evelyn could feel Cole weakening. His breathing was heavy and drawn. The scent of warm blood hung around his shirt. The wound, barely closed, had been stretched all morning. Are you in pain? She asked. It's not something I haven't experienced, he replied slowly. But it's something you shouldn't go through alone, Evelyn said. Cole looked over his eyes, deepening at that. But instead of answering, he asked back. Are you so used to helping others that you forget about yourself? Evelyn paused, her feet stopping on their own. She doesn't talk much about herself. She doesn't like people pointing out the parts of her that she tries to hide. She took a deep breath. When people see so many people die, and you can't save them all, they feel indebted. You don't owe anyone, Cole said softly. Sometimes I think I owe it to myself, Evelyn replied. Cole pursed his lips, not arguing. He just walked beside her, his steps heavy but deliberate, as if Evelyn's presence were pulling him forward. By midday they reached a rocky outcrop, low, dark, but with enough space to give them shelter from the wind. Evelyn set Cole down first, letting him catch his breath. She looked up at the sky through the pines, calculating the time. Only 4 or 5 hours before the night snow started to fall again. She turned back and opened her backpack. I need to check your wound right away. Cole took off his jacket, wincing as the fabric stuck to the bandage. Evelyn was careful, using warm snow water to wash around the wound. Worse than I thought, she said. You overdid it. What other choice do I have? Cole chuckled. Evelyn sighed. You're a true Westerner. As stubborn as a rock. And you... Cole looked up at her. As hard as steel. But maybe because you've been hurt more than I have. Evelyn paused. The words seemed to hit a nerve. Not the time to talk about that, she replied, her voice low. Maybe it's time, Cole said. If we don't survive the night, Evelyn put her finger to his lips. You will live. The words came not as a hope but as a promise. She was surprised by her own voice. Sure, strong, almost an oath. Cole looked at her so long that she felt her heart skip a beat. For the first time, he said softly, I completely trusted someone I had only known for a few days. Evelyn averted her eyes. Don't say things I don't know how to answer. I don't need an answer, Cole replied. Just know. They were silent. But it was a warm silence, not the kind that made one feel lonely, but the kind that made one feel at ease. A strong gust of wind blew down, followed by a slow but clear sound, the sound of snow under horse hooves. Evelyn jumped up. Someone's coming. Cole tried to stand but couldn't. Evelyn put her hand on his shoulder and pressed down gently. Don't, she said. You can't fight like this. What about you, Cole? Asked worriedly. Evelyn didn't answer. She just crouched down and pulled the dagger from her pack. She knew she couldn't fight hand to hand against someone with a gun, but she'd survived worse than this. And this time she wasn't fighting for herself, but for the man breathing heavily behind her. The sound of hooves was approaching. 1, then 2, then 3. Evelyn stood in the crack of rock, knife in hand. Cole gasped. Evelyn, please don't do anything, she said very softly, like the wind. I am not reckless. I just choose to stand where I need to stand. And the sound of hooves stopped just outside the forest. No one said anything. No one dismounted. No one called out. An eerie silence. Evelyn gripped the knife tighter. I wonder if the person out there is an enemy, or a ghost from Cole's past, or some other danger entirely. But she knew one thing tonight would not be peaceful. The sound of hooves outside was a steady drumming against Evelyn's chest. The cold wind blowing through the woods made her thin cloak tremble, but her hands did not tremble. She held the dagger tightly. The blade was not shiny, not beautiful, just something that had come with her from battle, rough, old, but trustworthy. Cole tried to lift himself up to look out of the crevice, but the pain made him suck in a breath through his teeth. Evelyn, he called softly. If they find us, they won't find it, Evelyn replied without turning. And if they do, you don't get up. Cole leaned back against the cold stone wall helplessly. He hated feeling defenseless. But Evelyn stood before him like a silent wall. It both reassured him and made his chest tighten with worry. Outside, the sound of hooves stopped. A man's voice rang out, not loud but enough for the pine forest to echo every word. "Is anyone in there?" Not like the rider's voice from last night. This one was deeper, older, with the air of someone who had lived his whole life in the saddle and understood loss. Evelyn did not rush to answer. She listened. Horses inhaled. Men adjusting reins. No sound of a gun being drawn. At least not yet. Cole whispered, "I know that voice." She turned back and looked at him. "What?" Cole closed his eyes for a second to gather his breath. Then he opened them, his eyes shining with a hope she had never seen in him before. "That's Hank. Hank Turner, longtime butler of Hartley Ranch." Evelyn frowned. "Are you sure?" "If I'm wrong, I recognize Cole," said his voice firmer than it had been since his injury. "Hank taught me how to ride. He's been with me since I was a child. He would never betray my family." Evelyn thought quickly. The man last night smelled cold with suspicion in his every breath. And today's voice carried the tiredness of someone who had spent the night looking for someone they were worried about. She took a deep breath, hiding the knife behind her back, but keeping it in her hand. Then she stepped out of the niche, just a small step enough to see the man standing 15 feet away. He was in his 50s, with a salt and pepper beard, a heavy sheepskin coat covered with snow, and a wide hat that half covered his face. But when he looked up, his eyes, tired but bright, made Evelyn realize he wasn't lying. "Hello," he said, his voice low and a little frightened when he saw her alone. "Have you seen anyone passing through these woods? We're looking for a man named Colton Hartley." Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked into his eyes. She saw no lies, no hatred, only genuine concern. "What do you want with him?" Evelyn asked. Hank let out a long breath. "He's been missing for 2 days. They said he was ambushed near the edge of the woods. I think he's dead, but I don't want to believe it." Evelyn swallowed. Her hand holding the knife slackened. "Are you going alone?" she asked. "There were 2 others with me," Hank said, "but they were going east. I split off and went south on instinct. He avoids the main road when there's trouble." Evelyn turned back to look into the hollow. Cole was struggling to stand. His lips trembled with cold, but his eyes were burning. "Let him in," Cole said softly. "Hank won't hurt you." Evelyn stepped aside. "You may dismount," she said. "The man you are looking for is here." Hank swung off his horse faster than a man his age should have. He ran toward the hollow, nearly falling in his haste. "Young master, oh my God." His voice caught when he saw Cole, pale, exhausted but alive. Hank knelt beside him, his hands shaking with joy. "You're alive. You're really alive." Cole smiled wanly. "I always make you worry." "Holy shit." Hank wiped away tears. "You were shot." "Who did this?" Cole tried to sit up, but Evelyn quickly caught him. Slowly, she said, "He's losing a lot of blood." Hank turned to Evelyn, looking at her closely for the first time. "Who are you, Evelyn Moore?" she replied. "I found him and kept him alive." Hank looked at her as if he were seeing a living angel. "You, a woman alone in the middle of winter, saving a man from being shot. You are the benefactor of Hartley Ranch." Evelyn avoided his gaze. She was not used to receiving gratitude. Cole breathed heavily. "Hank, does anyone at the ranch know I live?" Hank shook his head. "Not yet. But there's something you need to know." Evelyn stood still, not intervening. What Cole asked, his eyes flashing with wariness. "Your father," Hank swallowed. "He's sick. Very sick. He hasn't eaten or slept since he heard you were missing. He said if he can't find you, he doesn't want to live." Cole closed his eyes, the pain in his heart stronger than the wound in his side. Evelyn saw the slight tremor in his shoulders. She put her hand on his shoulder, saying nothing. A quiet presence, but enough. "So," Cole breathed heavily, "we have to go back." Hank shook his head. "No, you can't ride like this. And," he looked around, "it's not safe. There are people at the ranch, hiding something. I can't be sure they're not watching me." Evelyn frowned. "You mean The person who shot Cole could have been someone from the farm. Possibly, Hank replied. The air fell silent, like a stone dropped into a deep well. Cole opened his eyes and looked at Evelyn. The confirmation of the truth hurt more than the wound. Evelyn spoke first, her voice low but firm. Then, we can't go straight back to the ranch. We need somewhere else to hide and heal. Hank nodded vigorously. There's a place, an old hunting post on the southern edge of the prairie. Not many people know about it. We can get there before dark. Evelyn looked at Cole. Are you strong enough to go on? Cole struggled to stand. He was shaking. Cold sweat trickled down his temples. But he stood. With you here, he whispered, I can go. That statement made Evelyn's eyes soften for a very brief moment. Hank turned to her. You protected him for 2 days, you could say that, Evelyn replied. Hank placed his hand on his heart as if making a vow. I promise, from this moment, you will never have to face it alone again. That promise from an experienced Western man was as heavy as stone and as real as earth. But just then, just as hope was rising, a gunshot rang out in the distance in the woods. 1 hour, then another. Near Hank's face paled. They're really coming. Evelyn squeezed Cole's shoulder. We have to go. Now. Cole nodded, though his breath was short. Hank led the horse closer, helping Evelyn get Cole into the saddle. But before she set off, Evelyn looked deep into the shadows of the woods to the north. A strange feeling ran down her spine. Not only was Cole being pursued, but something was stalking her. But she didn't back down. She didn't run away. She didn't turn back. She placed her hand on Cole's back, steadying him in the saddle. The warmth of her palm made him relax a little. And the 3 of them, a wounded cowboy, a woman with a scarred past, and a loyal butler, left the woods on a bowstring. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they knew one thing: from this moment on their fates were linked. Not just to survive, but because something deeper is forming. Quietly, slowly, like smoldering fire in the snow. The evening wind blew across the prairie, cold and long, like the sigh of a land accustomed to both human fear and hope. The 3 of them, Cole, Evelyn, and Hank, moved along the small road leading south. The winter sun was not enough to warm them, but it was enough to reveal the thin streaks of cloud that stretched like gray silk. Cole sat in the saddle, his body swaying slightly with each step of the old horse. His shoulder leaned partly on Evelyn, who walked close to keep him steady. Every time the wind blew across his wound, Cole swallowed a gasp of pain but said nothing. Evelyn knew without needing to see. Can you handle it? She asked, her eyes still scanning the area. I can take it, Cole replied, breathing hard but keeping his voice steady. Just don't let me fall off the horse. You fell, so I pulled you back up, Evelyn said, her voice matter-of-fact. Hank led the way, shielding himself from the sun with his hand looking toward the horizon, where the underbrush blended with the white snow. The hunting station is just a little ways off, said Hank. But we must be quick. I fear they have split off in several directions. Evelyn nodded. I heard a shot just now. They must be threatening us or shooting a mark. Cole stirred slightly. They're not threatening. They're shooting to kill. Evelyn turned to look at him. Her eyes were warm but stern. You will not die. Not while I am here. Cole tilted his head slightly, his eyes softening ever so slightly. You always talk as if my life or death is your business. Evelyn looked straight ahead. Perhaps so. The words fell into the windy void, leaving Cole speechless. Not out of surprise, but because a strange feeling touched the deepest part of him. It was both comforting and painful, like someone stroking an old scar that had never healed. The path became narrower as the group entered underbrush and rocks in the snow. The horse stumbled a few times, causing Cole to lose his balance. Evelyn held out a hand to steady him each time he staggered. You don't have to do that, Cole said softly. I know, Evelyn replied. But I want to. Hank heard and turned to look at them with a slight smile. The kind of smile of an old man who has seen too much in life and knows when 2 souls are beginning to meet again. You're lucky, Master, said Hank. Not everyone gets to find someone to save them twice in a row. Cole sighed. Maybe I don't deserve to be so lucky. Evelyn looked at him. Don't say things like that. Everyone deserves to be saved, Cole wanted to argue. But her eyes made it impossible. As the sun began to set, Hank held up a hand to signal a halt. He sniffed the air, then cocked his ear. "There is the sound of horses," he said. "Distant but coming toward us." Evelyn immediately stepped closer to Cole, her battle instincts kicking in. "How many people?" she asked. "Hard to say," Hank replied. "Maybe 2, maybe 3. "How far are we to the hunting station?" Evelyn asked again. "About half a mile," said Hank. "Over that little hill." Evelyn studied the terrain. To reach the hill they would have to cross low, open ground with no cover. If they got out before they got there, they lived. If not, Evelyn tightened her grip on the reins. "We must go, now." Cole looked at her. "What if I slow it all down?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. She approached the horse, put her hand behind Cole's back and held him steady. "Then I'll drag you there, even if it means breaking your shoulder." Cole was silent. A silence that made his breath catch. He turned and said softly, very softly, "Evelyn, you're risking it for me." "No," Evelyn replied. "I risk for what is right." No one objected. They urged their horses forward. The wind picked up as they left the shadows of the forest. The twilight stretched across the snow, blurring the landscape. A low patch of land opened up before them, flat, wide, and easy to see from a distance. "Just go straight," said Hank. "There's a crevice in the hill that leads to the hunting station." They had only gone a short distance when the sound of horse hooves from behind became clearer. It was definitely not far away. Evelyn turned, eyes wide. "They are coming." Hank urged his horse faster. "Stay close." Cole held on to the saddle horn to keep from falling, and Evelyn kept him on her right side so that if a bullet came, she could block it. The wind whistled past their ears. Snow whipped under their hooves. They raced like 3 shadows in a vast white sea, their only choices left, live or be hunted to death. Behind, a man's voice shouted, "Stop gunfire." A loud bang seemed to tear the gray sky apart. Snow flew from the ground beside Hank's horse. Cole started. "They're shooting," Hank shouted. "Get down." Evelyn immediately pulled Cole's head down to the horse's mane, and at that moment a second bullet whizzed past them, hitting the snow ahead. "Hold on," Evelyn shouted, grabbing Cole with both arms. The horse staggered but still charged forward as if driven by survival instinct. Evelyn, Cole gasped. "It'll be safer if you stay behind me." "No," she said almost harshly. "I'm right where I'm supposed to be." His breath caught in his throat. For the first time in years, Cole was afraid. Not of his own death, but of her, standing in danger that should have been his. They charged up the hill. The ground was slippery, and the rocks were rolling. Hank led the way, shouting, "Come on, here we go!" Evelyn looked up and saw a small, dark crevice in the rock just below the hillside, only a few dozen feet away. Behind, the sound of horse hooves became more urgent. The pursuer shouted loudly, "Stop, Colton!" Cole gritted his teeth. "The bastard! I know his voice." Later, Evelyn shouted back, "Live now!" The third bullet went off. Evelyn heard only the screech of metal. No pain, just a loud impact. Then a loud wind escaped Cole's mouth. Evelyn panicked. Cole leaned, almost falling off the saddle, but Evelyn caught him. She saw fresh blood on the shoulder of his shirt. "Just a graze," he managed, his voice weary. "No, not deep. If you lose any more blood, I'll slap you," Evelyn hissed, eyes blazing. While Hank screamed. A few more steps, Hank's horse galloped through the first crack in the rocks. Evelyn pulled her horse along. As they edged through, Hank threw a large boulder to the ground, blocking the narrow opening. Just enough to make a makeshift barrier, but enough to buy time. Outside, the pursuers shouted angrily. Evelyn, breathing heavily, turned to Cole. He was pale, tired, short of breath, but alive. She put her hand on his cheek. "Cole," she called, "look at me." He opened his eyes, looking into hers, as if clinging to the only thing keeping him alive. "You are still here," he said softly. "Always here," Evelyn replied, her voice softening. "No one will take you from me." Cole smiled weakly, but it was the genuinest smile Evelyn had seen him since he'd met him. Hank looked at the two of them, then at the blood on Cole's shoulder. He sighed bitterly. "We need to get to the hunting station. Cole can't take another wound." Evelyn nodded, took Cole's hand, and spoke low, as deep as a promise a Westerner could make to another. "You will not die in the saddle today. I swear it." And in that moment, in the cold steppe, in the midst of the falling darkness, in the sound of the wind and the threat behind them, their two seemingly exhausted souls found something very small, but strong enough to hold on to life. Hope. Not a fragile hope, but a hope built on the choice of two people who have suffered too much to believe in anything easy. The old hunting station sat hidden under a low stone arch like an old bird's nest left by hunters years ago. The rough wooden door tilted to one side, the wind rustling through the cracks like the breath of the past. Hank pushed the door open first, and out came the damp, rotting smell familiar to anyone who had lived in the wilds of the West. Evelyn led Cole in first, her steps light but sure. Hank scanned the small room, an old desk, a few broken wall hooks, a faded pine single bed, and a dusty black stone fireplace. Not much was usable, but at least it was draft-proof and warm enough if they lit a fire. "Put him to bed," Hank said, his voice full of concern. Evelyn nodded slightly. She placed her hands behind Cole's back, carefully helping him down from the bed. When Cole's back hit the hard board, he let out a soft groan of pain. Evelyn immediately placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice low but firm. "It's okay, you're safe. I'll take care of the rest." His breathing slowed, as if reassured by the very tone of her voice. Hank hurriedly gathered dry wood from the pile in the corner, trying to start a fire. Each strike of the rock that created sparks echoed loudly in the small space, creating a sense of urgency. Evelyn opened her backpack, took out the bandage bag. Her hands were quick but not hurried, as if she was touching something more precious than life itself. "Pull down his shirt," she said. "I need to see the fresh wound." Cole tried to lift his arm, but the pain was too much, so he asked Evelyn to help. She cut the torn shirt and lifted the fabric. The bullet wound was red, dried blood but bruised around it. The old wound in his side was also stretched. Hank looked at it and shook his head with a sigh. "God, I don't understand what keeps the master with us," Evelyn replied without taking her eyes off the wound. "The will to live kept him going. And maybe something more." Cole looked at her. His gray eyes were tired but deep as the bottom of an old well. "You believe that I believe in people who refuse to die," Evelyn said softly. "And you always fought back against the things that wanted to kill you." Cole smiled just a breath. "I resisted, because I didn't want to leave some things behind." Evelyn paused for a moment, then continued cleaning the wound. She didn't ask what, not because she didn't want to know, but because his eyes said it all. The fire in the hearth flared to life, illuminating the room and radiating warmth. Hank set the pot of water on the hearthstone and turned to watch Evelyn work. He recognized in her every movement, calm, determined, careful, the mark of someone who had faced something worse than the horsemen pursuing them. He spoke softly, as if sharing his heart. "I owe you, Miss Moore. If it weren't for you, Cole would be lying in the cold snow." Evelyn did not look up. "You owe me nothing. Everyone deserves to be saved." Hank looked at her with calm, experienced eyes. "People who say that are usually the ones who haven't been saved." Evelyn paused. Cole realized. He asked softly, "Evelyn, what really happened to you?" A paper-thin silence fell over the room. Evelyn placed the blood-soaked cloth into the small bowl, her hand shaking slightly but steadying itself. She looked at no one as she spoke. "I once let a man die in my arms." The words sank like a pebble into a stream. Hank stopped gathering firewood. Cole tilted his head, trying to see her face. "He was young," Evelyn continued. "A private, seriously wounded in battle. I thought I could save him, but I was wrong. People blamed me. The whole unit turned against me. They said I wasn't good enough, not smart enough, not—" Her voice caught. "I wasn't anything." Cole didn't interrupt. He let her talk because he understood the wounds in her heart could only breathe when she dared to open them to someone. Evelyn continued, her voice low and soft as the night wind. "And then someone loudly said that my presence brought them bad luck, once a comrade. And yet they said I was a bad omen." She smiled, but the smile was heavier than her tears. "I left the unit. I wandered. I went to Pittsburgh, then Wyoming." Hank bowed his head. "You didn't deserve that." Cole looked at her for a long time. There was something in his eyes that was both pity and respect. "You are not the reason anyone died. You are the only one who dared to stand in the face of death to save them." Evelyn did not turn around, but her shoulders shook slightly. Cole continued, his voice low, warm, and powerful enough to break the invisible distance. "She wasn't abandoned because she failed. She was abandoned because they were afraid to look at their own weakness. Evelyn closed her eyes. Cole's words were like a hand on a wound she thought was scarred, but had never really healed. Hank ladled hot water into a bowl and set it beside Evelyn. "He's right." She opened her eyes and looked at the two men before her. One was old and wise, the other was wounded but still clear-eyed, and for the first time in years, she did not feel judged. She felt seen. When she finished wrapping Cole, he was breathing heavily as if he had just climbed a long hill. "Thanks," he said. "Don't thank me too much," Evelyn replied, trying to hide her growing weakness. "I have to change the bandages again tomorrow." Cole looked at her gratefully. "I live because of you." "You live on your own," Evelyn corrected. "I only helped you up the steep part. You couldn't go alone." Cole wanted to say something, but the door to the hunting lodge swung slightly as a strong wind blew in. Hank immediately put his hand to the gun at his belt, his eyes alert. Evelyn stood up, watching the wooden door shake. "Just the wind," she said. "But it will be windy tonight." Hank exhaled, lowering his gun. "We have to take turns, though." "You go first," Evelyn said. "I'll stay with Cole. You need to rest." Hank nodded and walked toward the door. The room grew quieter. There was only the crackling of the fire and Cole's slow breathing. Evelyn sat down beside the bed. Cole looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "You know, I've never felt as safe with anyone as I do with you." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She held her breath and kept her voice steady. "You have a slight fever. People with fever tend to talk nonsense." Cole smiled, tired but warm. "I have never been so serious as I am right now." Evelyn looked down at the floor to avoid his gaze. But Cole continued, his voice like a warm breath on a winter wind. "I came back to life, and the first thing I saw was you. That was no coincidence." Evelyn bit her lip. A slight quiver in her eyelashes betrayed the emotions she tried to hide. She whispered, "You should sleep. I will watch over you." Cole closed his eyes, but his lips still moved. "Thank you, Evelyn, for not leaving me behind." She placed her hand on his, a light touch, so light, like an acknowledgement of two hearts that had suffered too much. "I will never leave you," she whispered. "Never." Then she sat up straight, listening to the wind outside, whipping against the wooden roof, letting her heart beat for the first time in many years. The night wind in the west always had a special sigh, long, deep, so cold it felt like the world was walking in the darkness. Inside the hunting lodge, the fire in the hearth waxed and waned, the light casting shadows on the stone walls like old memories. Evelyn sat beside Cole, eyes half open, watching his wound and listening to every sound outside. Cole turned slightly toward her. His breathing was more even but still heavy. The breath of someone who had been through a long period of pain and still feared what was waiting just beyond the flimsy wooden door. Hank stood close to the door, gun in hand, his eyes like those of an old sheepdog, tired but extremely alert. As midnight approached, the wind grew stronger, gusts of wind pounding against the roof of the hunting lodge as if peeling layers off. But amid the noise, another sound crept in, very faint, very sharp. Not wind, not a wild animal. Evelyn opened her eyes. She sat up straight. "Hank," she whispered, "there's someone out there." Hank put his finger to his lips and stepped closer to the crack in the door. He tilted his head and listened. At first, there was only the wind, but then a very slight rustling, like boots hitting snow and quickly withdrawing. "Someone," Hank said softly, his eyes narrowing. Cole tried to sit up, but Evelyn put her hand on his chest, stopping him. "You mustn't get up," she whispered, "no matter what happens." Cole grabbed her wrist in the darkness. "Evelyn." "If they find us, you live above all else," Evelyn replied, her voice low but firm, as the mooring rope of a ship in a storm. She didn't say more important than me, but Cole heard it in every breath she took. Hank motioned for her to stay put. He moved closer to the door, pressing his ear to the wood. In the pause in the wind, the sudden silence made every other sound stand out clearly. There were footsteps, but not running. Light footsteps circling the station, looking for a weak spot. Evelyn drew the dagger from her belt. The blade that had been her lifeline on the battlefield was now the only thing standing between Cole and death. Hank whispered, "If anything happens, you take Cole out the back. I'll hold them off." Evelyn shook her head. "You will die." "We'll all three die if you don't," Hank replied, still looking at the door. "I'm old, Evelyn. I won't leave Cole again." Cole tried to turn. Nobody died. "Hank, you didn't do anything stupid." Hank gave a sad smile. "I may not be as smart as you, Master, but you are the one your father put his fortune and his life into. No one will touch you while I breathe." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. The wind stopped. The footsteps disappeared. But this silence is not normal. She stood next to Hank and whispered, "They're waiting." "Yes," Hank replied, "and that's the scariest thing." The minutes stretched like hours. Cole tried to concentrate, but the pain was wearing him down. He looked at Evelyn and Hank, the two people standing in the darkness, keeping him alive. He felt pain and gratitude and fear. Not afraid of death, but afraid of losing them. A small sound came, not from the door, not from the roof, but from behind the station, where there is a trail leading to the edge of the cliff. Hank turned around immediately. "There's a back entrance," he whispered. Evelyn gripped her knife. "I'll go check." Hank stopped her. "No. You stay here with Cole. I'm going out." "No, Mr. Hank," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the air. "I'm faster. I hear better. And I'm used to fighting in the dark." Hank started to argue, but her eyes stopped him. "Cole," whispered Evelyn, "don't go out there alone." The firelight illuminated her face, a face both tough and wounded, but now in Cole's eyes achingly beautiful. "I'll be back," she said. "I promise." Cole gripped her hand tighter. Don't make that promise so easily." "I can't bear it." If Evelyn placed her other hand on his cheek. "I came back because you're the first person in years who's made me want to live again." Cole felt as if he had been hit somewhere deeper than the wound. He was speechless. Evelyn squeezed his hand as if drawing strength from her own heart, and stood. She motioned for Hank to stay with Cole while she headed toward the back of the hunting station. Her steps were light, each step taking her to the small opening in the rocks, dark and cold. Evelyn held her breath, pressing her back against the rock. She listened, a heavy breath. Someone, very close. She leaned out a little, just enough to see. A figure knelt in the snow as if searching for clues. It was not the gunman she had feared that afternoon. This one wore a dark coat, his hood pulled low. His breath came in white puffs. Evelyn stepped back. She knew the slightest movement would make a sound. A voice rang out right behind her, making her blood freeze in a heartbeat. "Don't move," Evelyn started. But she didn't turn because the knife was already in her back. The voice deep, strange, cold, but it was not the night from last night. "Miss Evelyn Moore," the man said. "I know you're here." Evelyn's body stiffened, not from fear, but because the voice knew her name and knew her past. "Who are you?" she asked, through gritted teeth. "Someone wants to talk," he replied, "but not here. If you cooperate, no one will die. Not you, not Colton Hartley." Evelyn's pulse tightened as if squeezed from within. She knew she had to make a split-second assessment. A desperate stab might save Cole, or it might invite the others in and end it all. She exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" "We want Cole," he said in a low voice that seemed to be carried by the wind, but alive. "And we want you quiet." Evelyn clutched her knife, old anger rising in her. The way the world always wanted her silent. The way power always made the truth die before the innocent. But this time she was different. She was no longer alone. She spoke slowly. Each word seemed to cut through the pain and into the darkness. "I will not hand him over." He was silent. Then he chuckled. "You will have to choose." Just as he was about to bring the knife closer to her back, a gunshot. From inside the station, Hank fired a warning shot. He flinched. Evelyn spun quickly, elbowing him. He backed away but kept his balance. A second shot rang out. Hank shouted, "Evelyn, back off." She dashed back into the station. He disappeared into the darkness like a wild animal. Evelyn slammed the door. Hank locked the wooden latch. They both turned to look at Cole. He was sitting bolt upright in bed, his eyes frantic. "Evelyn, are you okay?" She stood there, breathing hard, her hair tangled from the wind and the incredible speed of the struggle. Then she walked over and knelt beside Cole's bed. "It's okay," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I promise." Cole took her hand speechless. His face was pale, but his eyes held such relief that Evelyn felt a warmth in her chest. Hank looked at both of them, nodding solemnly. "They don't just want to kill you, they want to silence her. We have to leave before dawn." Evelyn held Cole's hand tighter. "We're going," she said. "I won't let anyone take you from me." The words sounded like an oath in the cold night. A promise not just to Cole but to the life she would choose from here on out. As the night wind died down and the first light of dawn painted the sky a pale pink, Evelyn knew their time at the hunting station was over. The cold was no longer sharp but still enough to bite into the skin, making one feel as if the world were holding its breath in anticipation of something more important to come. Inside, Hank was preparing the horse, his movements familiar but somehow urgent, as if he knew every second was precious. He checked the reins, tested each knot, his old but strong hands shaking slightly from impatience rather than cold. Cole was sitting against the rough wooden headboard of the bed, the dim light washing over his face, still pale, still wan, but alive. And to Evelyn, that life was enough to soften her heart in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in years. She knelt beside him, checking the bandages on his chest. The wound was no longer bleeding, but if she moved too hard, all the efforts she had made to save him over the past 2 nights would be in vain. She touched his skin lightly to check his temperature, her hands cold from the wind but still warm, like someone who had lost too much to fear anything more. Cole looked at her intently. "You don't have to do it again," he said softly, his voice as low as the pebbles at the bottom of a stream. "I'm still breathing." Evelyn didn't look up. "That's why I did it again," she replied. "None of us want you to stop breathing in the middle of the road." Cole laughed. Just a small laugh, but the first since falling through the snow in the storm the day before. It made Evelyn's eyes flutter, as if she had heard the sound of something being found. "We're leaving now," Hank said from the doorway. "First light is the best time to avoid an ambush. If they're still around, they'll lose focus when the day turns." Evelyn helped Cole to his feet. He took her shoulders, leaning more than he would have liked, but Evelyn didn't complain. They were both silent for a moment, a silence that was no longer oppressive but trusting, like those late winter moments when the ground isn't warm but the snow has already begun to melt. Leaving the hunting station, the group followed the rocky slope that led down into the valley. The sky was still misty, making everything blurry, as if the land was hiding them under a thin blanket of nature. Evelyn led the horse slowly, her steps steady and rhythmic, always keeping Cole in sight. He rode, leaning against the saddle, his hands clenching as pain passed. Yet no word of complaint escaped his lips. Hank followed a few paces behind them, his eyes scanning every direction as if he could hear the rustling of enemies half a mile away. He didn't say much, but Evelyn knew he was racked with guilt for letting Cole fall into danger right before his eyes. The valley beyond began to appear wider, brighter, and safer. But the descent was still long and treacherous. Evelyn could feel the tension in the wind that blew across the prairie, as if nature itself were watching their steps. Cole suddenly spoke, his voice weak but clear. "Evelyn." She turned back. Cole looked straight at her, his eyes strangely honest in the morning mist. If I don't make it through this, you have to promise to keep Hartley Ranch. Hank will help you." "You can." "I didn't hear those words," Evelyn interrupted, her voice low but sharp as the dagger she always carried. "You're alive, Cole, very much alive. And I don't leave anyone halfway, least of all you." Cole smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "You were sent to argue with me until your last breath." Evelyn replied softly, her eyes on the road but her voice soft. "I don't want you to have your last breath." The mist cleared. The wind died down, and in that brief moment when the light slid silently between their eyes, almost missing each other, the world around them seemed to slow down. As the three turned into a narrow ravine, Hank held up a hand to signal them to stop. He bent down and touched the footprints near the edge of the still melted snow. Shoe prints, new. Evelyn moved closer, her heart instinctively tightening. "They got there before us." "No," Hank said. "They're looking for a crossing, but they haven't found us yet." Cole closed his eyes briefly, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. "We have to go around west," Hank said. "Longer, but safer." Evelyn nodded. "As long as we avoid fighting, I agree." The group turned off in a new direction. This path was narrower and stonier but less marked. Half a mile into the journey, Evelyn heard the sound of running water, a small stream running through a rocky crevice down into Hartley Valley. The sound of the water carried a sound she was familiar with: peace. She turned back to Cole. He was watching her, his eyes softening as he saw the relief flash across her face. "Does the sound of water remind you of something?" he asked. Evelyn replied, "Remember that no matter how cruel people are, water still flows where it must." Cole smiled, but his eyes were more serious. "And so are you, Evelyn Moore. You're going exactly where you're supposed to be." The words made her heart flutter. She didn't answer, just turned away, not wanting Cole to see her eyes growing warmer than usual. Around noon, when the sun was high enough to dry the dew on the pine branches, Hank stopped and pointed to a stretch of snowy field in the distance. Hartley Ranch. It was still a few miles away, but seeing the house where Cole grew up made Evelyn feel like a layer had been peeled away from her heart that had been heavy for days. Cole sighed. Home. Evelyn looked at him, seeing in his eyes the weakness of someone who had just escaped death, but also the fire of someone who belonged to this land from birth. "We're taking him home," she said, her voice more certain than she thought. The group continued their journey slowly but steadily, like the heartbeat of someone going through pain to find the meaning of life. Cole suddenly said after a long moment of silence, "Evelyn, when everything settles down, I want to take you somewhere." She frowned slightly. "Where?" "The big rock by the east bank of the stream. My father once said, if one day I meet someone I want to keep by my side, take them there." Evelyn was silent. Why? Cole looked straight ahead, his voice slow as if he wanted each word to be caught in the wind, because that's where he said a man must speak the truth in his heart. Hank behind him smiled slightly as if he had heard that saying years ago and had always hoped for this day to happen. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She felt something inside her, a deep, long, dormant wound, warming as if it wanted to be healed. She said softly, very slowly, "When you get better, I will hear those things." Cole nodded slightly. "I'll keep my word." The wind changed direction. Sunlight poured down the valley, and in that moment Evelyn Moore knew her life was taking a new path. One she would no longer walk alone, no longer carry the burden of herself like a shadow from the past. She is entering a world where her silence becomes power, where she heals others, and ultimately heals herself. And Cole Hartley, the cowboy she found in the snow, became the support she didn't think she deserved until fate brought them together. But the strangest and most beautiful thing is this: sometimes love doesn't come with a knock on the door. It comes with the breathing of the person you save, with eyes searching for you in the mist, with the fear of losing each other before dawn. And in the midst of that vast west, Evelyn knew she found home. The story of Evelyn and Cole reminds us that as we age, we realize that we don't survive by strength alone, but by connection. Losses, wounds, and years of silent suffering can all be healed when we meet the right person at the right time. Sometimes a small act like deciding to save a stranger can open a new chapter that we never imagined. And it's only after going through many ups and downs that we understand that silence is sometimes stronger than any explanation. Kindness is stronger than any wound, and hope, however fragile, is enough to help people stand up. We all deserve to be loved again, even if our hearts have been broken. Thank you, the audience who love and accompany me, especially the elderly uncles and aunts who always take the time to listen to these humane stories. If the story brings you warmth, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that I have more motivation to bring more healing stories.